Imagine a 7-year-old girl walking into a skyscraper alone, wearing her mom's oversized blazer. Not to find her lost parent, but to interview for her mother's job. What happens next shakes the company to its core, uncovers a secret. Even the CEO didn't see coming, and leaves everyone questioning. What if one small act of courage could change everything? Keep watching, because this is one story you won't forget. Dear friend, what you're about to experience is not just a story. It's a deeply human journey about loss, resilience, and the quiet, unexpected ways love finds us when we need it most. If this is your first time here, I invite you to drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing your voice. And if you're someone who believes in second chances, in the hidden strength of ordinary people, and in stories that stay with you long after they end, consider subscribing and tapping the bell icon. We share moments that matter. Thank you for being part of this one. Now, let's begin. He was a man of numbers, power, and precision. Dorian Blackwell, CEO of Olympus Consulting Group, didn't believe in luck emotions or second chances. His world was made of forecasts, performance charts, and silent boardrooms on the 47th floor of a glass tower overlooking Seattle's rainy skyline. People didn't cry in his office. They didn't plead. They delivered or they disappeared. That morning began no differently, until a small determined knock echoed through the marble lobby. She barely reached the reception desk. "Excuse me," she said. "I'm here for the 9 o'clock interview." Paula, the receptionist, blinked. "Sweetheart, are you lost? Where's your mom or dad?" "My mom was supposed to come," the girl replied, sliding a worn leather folder onto the counter. "But she's at the hospital, so I came instead." 7-year-old Maddie Coleman wore her mother's blazer like armor. It drowned her tiny frame, the sleeves nearly covering her fingers. Her blonde ponytail was lopsided. Her shoes 2 sizes too big. But her voice steady, clear, braver than anyone expected. And that moment cracked the building's unspoken rules. Security hesitated. Paula hesitated, but one person didn't. From the mezzanine above, Dorian Blackwell paused mid-conference call. He stared at the girl who looked both impossibly small and strangely familiar. A name rose from the receptionist's mouth, Maddie Coleman. He descended the stairs slowly, like gravity was changing around him. "You said your mother's in the hospital," he asked. "Yes, sir. She couldn't breathe last night." The ambulance came. Dorian's sharp blue eyes flicked to the folder. "And you came here." "Why? Because she needs this job," Maddie said. "We can't keep living like this." She said Olympus was her best chance. So I memorized everything. Silence. Not the awkward kind. The kind that changes air pressure. She opened the folder with 2 hands, smoothing the resume like it was sacred. "My mom's name is Jenna Coleman. She has a master's degree in systems management, and she led a digital migration project that saved her old company $1.2 million over 2 years. She built the strategy. She can show you the spreadsheet well she could if she weren't on oxygen right now." She stopped, took a breath. "I made the chart colorful so it's easier to read." Dorian stared at her. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to say. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals without blinking. He'd fired entire departments over lunch. But now, a child stood before him pitching, not herself but her mother, with more conviction than most candidates twice her mother's age. "Come with me," he said finally. Maddie followed him into the executive elevator. As the doors closed, she looked up at him and added, "I'm not allowed to drink coffee, but I can make it if you'd like some." He laughed, actually laughed. It startled both of them. Dorian Blackwell wasn't known for laughing. But something about her, the honesty, the nerve, the innocent determination felt like a crack in a wall he'd spent years fortifying. He didn't realize yet that he was looking at the beginning of his own unraveling. The elevator opened into Olympus's top-floor glass walls, polished floors, and silence so heavy it could snap. He guided her into his office. It was a shrine to success. Framed Forbes covers, strategy trophies, a painting of Mount Rainier. "Sit," he said gently. She perched on the edge of a leather chair, pulling the folder back into her lap. "Why Olympus?" he asked. "Because you're the only company that does people-first consulting," Maddie answered. "My mom says most companies just say that, but you really do it. Or she thought you did." Her voice trembled slightly. Dorian leaned forward. "What does that mean to you? People first?" "It means when someone's smart and hardworking, but also a mom, you still give her a chance. Even if her life is messy, even if she doesn't fit in perfect boxes." He looked away. The words struck him too close. 15 years ago, his wife, Caroline, had used almost the same words, back when she tried to return to work after giving birth. Before the world reminded her that motherhood wasn't a line item companies wanted on resumes. Before the car crash. Before the grief swallowed him whole. He cleared his throat. "And your dad?" "Don't know him," Maddie said matter-of-factly. "Mom says he wasn't ready to be a dad. But we're okay. We're a team." Something tightened in his chest. Familiar, unwelcome. Then she did something that would stay with him forever. She pulled out a drawing. "This is us," she said, "if Mom gets the job." It showed 3 stick figures, Maddie, her mom, and a man in a tie. "Mr. Dorian," it read above his head. In crayon, he froze. This wasn't just a plea. It was hope drawn with conviction. He reached for his intercom. "Cancel the board prep," he told his assistant. "Sir," she replied, shocked. "Reschedule everything. And find out which doctor is treating Jenna Coleman at Virginia Mason." He looked back at Maddie. "Would you like to visit your mom?" Her eyes widened. "Can we can?" She smiled, and without asking, slid her small hand into his. It was warm, trusting, devastating. What do you do when a child places their faith in you without knowing the weight of your past? He didn't have the answer, but for the first time in years, Dorian Blackwell wanted to find it. That evening, as the two of them entered the hospital, nurses stared. A CEO in a tailored Armani suit holding the hand of a child in oversized shoes and borrowed clothes. It didn't make sense until you saw his face. Not cold, not calculating, but haunted, softened, human. Sometimes, the smallest interruption to your schedule becomes the beginning of everything you didn't know you needed. Sometimes, it's not a portfolio that earns the interview, it's the courage of a child who refuses to let her mother's worth go unnoticed. And sometimes, healing begins with a knock on the wrong door. What Dorian was about to discover standing in a sterile hospital room beside a woman who didn't even know he was coming would force him to reckon not only with his company's values, but with his own buried regrets. And that's where we go next. When power meets vulnerability. When legacy collides with conscience. In the next chapter, we step into the room where it all begins to change. Room 305 at Virginia Mason Medical Center was quiet, except for the rhythmic beep of monitors and the distant shuffle of nurses in the hallway. Jenna Coleman lay propped against a pillow, her skin, pale lips dry, and an oxygen cannula beneath her nose. Her dark hair, matted slightly with sweat, framed a face once full of motion, now still with fatigue. She wasn't expecting visitors. She certainly wasn't expecting him. When Dorian Blackwell stepped through the door behind her daughter, she blinked twice, unsure if she was hallucinating from medication. "Maddie, what are you—" "Hi, Mom," Maddie whispered already at her side. "I brought someone." Jenna's eyes shifted to the tall man in the suit. Her voice cracked. Mr. Blackwell Dorian nodded once. "Miss Coleman, I apologize for the intrusion. Your daughter—" She made a compelling case. Jenna struggled to sit up straighter. "Oh my God, I am so sorry, Maddie, you weren't supposed to." "I wanted to help," Maddie said quickly. "You stayed up working on your resume even though you were coughing. I didn't want them to forget about you." Jenna closed her eyes, the weight of everything threatening to collapse her composure. "You shouldn't have had to do that." "But I did," Maddie said simply, "because I believe in you." Dorian watched this exchange silently, his hands clenched behind his back. He'd come expecting professionalism, maybe gratitude, certainly awkwardness. He didn't expect this, the raw, disarming reality of what survival looked like for some families. Jenna turned to him, her voice still hoarse. "I'm mortified. I never meant for my daughter to step into that building, let alone speak to someone like you." "She didn't speak," he said quietly. "She commanded the room." Jenna's cheeks flushed with a mix of fever and humiliation. "I know how this looks. Single mother out of work, suddenly leveraging a child to gain sympathy." "You didn't leverage anything," Dorian interrupted. "Your daughter took initiative, and she did it with facts." That gave Jenna pause. "May I sit?" he asked. She nodded, and he pulled up a chair beside the hospital bed. He picked up the folder Maddie had carried, the same worn leather cover, and flipped through the pages already familiar. "Your qualifications are exceptional. Your project results from Xenotech show leadership under pressure. I particularly appreciated your breakdown of phase migration in the cloud transition." Jenna managed a faint smile. "I'm used to doing a lot with very little." He looked at her directly. "Why haven't you found something since?" Jenna hesitated. "Honestly," she said, adjusting her pillow, "because no one wants to hire a maybe. A maybe. Maybe she'll have to leave work early for a sick kid. Maybe she'll need too many sick days. Maybe she'll be distracted. I walk into interviews knowing they're already calculating the risk of my personal life bleeding into my professional one." She paused. "They ask about availability, reliability, but they're really asking, are you a liability? And when I say I'm a single parent with no support system, the tone shifts. Every time." Dorian didn't respond. He didn't have to. He recognized the pattern in other ways, bias hidden beneath professionalism, concern disguised as protocol. He'd made decisions based on those same calculations. Maddie sat quietly, her small hand holding her mother's fingers gently. "We've been hanging on," Jenna said softly. "Rent, school lunch, internet for remote learning. Then the car broke down. And I got pneumonia, worse timing." Something in her voice cracked on that last line. Not from weakness. From the quiet exhaustion of someone who had held everything together for too long and now feared the pieces slipping beyond reach. Dorian felt a memory rush in. Caroline, his late wife, pacing their living room years ago. Frustrated, determined. Telling him she wanted to return to work. That she didn't want to be just someone's wife. That she'd built skills she refused to let die quietly in motherhood. He hadn't listened. Not really. "Your daughter?" he said after a long pause, "is remarkable." "I know," Jenna whispered. "But I hate that she had to be. I hate that she knew to fight so hard already." That sentence lodged deep. In his world, success was calculated in KPIs, quarterly earnings expansion. But in Jenna's world, success was keeping the lights on and your child fed and still finding time to make her feel safe. He stood and reached into his suit pocket, pulling out a card. "Have the hospital billing office call this number. The charges are covered." Jenna's brows drew together. "Mr. Blackwell, I can't consider it a professional courtesy," he said. "An investment in someone who clearly knows how to lead under pressure." Maddie looked at her mom. "Does that mean you got the job?" Dorian smiled at her but said nothing. "We'll talk next week." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Miss Coleman," he said without looking back, "your resume didn't move me. Your strategy report didn't. Your daughter did. And maybe it's time Olympus started remembering that people, real people, still matter." After he left, Jenna couldn't speak for a full minute. Maddie rested her head on her mother's arm. "I didn't mess it up, did I?" "No," Jenna whispered. "You reminded someone important that we matter. And that's what this moment was. Not a job offer, not a favor, but the reawakening of something buried in Dorian Blackwell. We often think power fixes everything. That if we can climb high enough, build fast enough, win loudly enough, nothing can hurt us. But power doesn't heal loneliness, or grief, or regret. And when a little girl walked into a skyscraper with nothing but a folder and a heart full of hope, she did what spreadsheets couldn't. She cracked open a fortress. What Dorian didn't yet realize was that this one moment would ripple through his company and his life in ways even he couldn't calculate. For the next 5 days, Maddie Coleman became a quiet presence on the top floor of Olympus Consulting Group. With Jenna still recovering at home, and only after her mother's cautious approval, Dorian arranged for Maddie to spend her afternoons in a quiet corner office near his own. A retired teacher, now part-time Olympus consultant, agreed to supervise her. No official titles were given, but word spread fast the little girl from the lobby had somehow become a regular guest in the boardroom corridors. At first, employees whispered. Some were amused, some skeptical, but most were intrigued. Olympus was a place of polished shoes, sharp deadlines, and fewer smiles than spreadsheets. It wasn't built for children. But somehow, Maddie fit. She arrived each day with her backpack, a peanut butter sandwich, and a curiosity that made even the most hardened analysts soften. She finished homework quickly, then wandered not aimlessly but observantly. She'd watch designers pitch campaigns. She'd peer into finance meetings, her head tilted, listening. By Wednesday, something shifted. "I think your ad colors are too dark," she said casually to the marketing team as she munched apple slices. "Kids like bright stuff. Even grown-ups smile more when it's not all gray and navy." The director blinked. "You think so?" Maddie shrugged. "At school, we did a poster contest. The winners always used orange, yellow, or green. The following day, a new mock-up included bolder colors, and testing showed increased engagement." Maddie noticed things no one else did. She pointed out that the conference chairs in one wing were different heights, making shorter team members slouch during presentations. She noted that 2 of the vending machines took coins, but only one accepted cards, and it was on the floor below. She suggested that if Olympus had so many international clients, maybe the waiting area should have magazines in more than just English. None of it was meant to impress. It was just how she saw the world. And somehow, Dorian noticed that his staff people who once feared his footsteps began asking, "Is Maddie coming in today?" What surprised him most was how much he looked forward to seeing her, too. On Thursday afternoon, he stepped into her temporary office just as she was scribbling numbers on a napkin. "Are those multiplication tables?" he asked. "Sort of," Maddie replied. "I was thinking about your supply chain issue." He raised an eyebrow. "I overheard Mr. Davidson talking about vendor delays. If stuff's always late from the East Coast, wouldn't it be faster to use someone in Denver or St. Louis? That's closer to here, right?" Dorian blinked. It was a child's geography logic, but it wasn't wrong. And more importantly, it came from a place of pattern-seeking, of genuine interest. "You're not like most kids," he said. Maddie looked up. "Is that bad?" "No," he replied quietly. "It's rare." That night, Dorian couldn't stop thinking about her, about how freely she gave her thoughts, how she didn't edit herself to fit in, how no one had ever told her that her observations didn't matter. He thought about Caroline again, about Lily, about the voices he would never hear again. Then, on Friday, something unusual happened. Janet, his longtime assistant, stood in his doorway with 2 cups of coffee. "She reminds you of someone, doesn't she?" Janet asked, setting 1 cup down. Dorian didn't answer. Janet had worked beside him for 16 years. She'd seen him through hostile takeovers, national expansions, and the quiet collapse of his marriage. "She's not just a visitor," Janet said gently. "She's starting to change the way people think. You're different. The whole floor is." He didn't deny it. "She makes people look up," he said, literally. "She walks by and they sit straighter, they explain things, they smile." Janet sipped her coffee. We needed that. By the end of the week, Jenna was well enough to return for her formal interview. She wore her best navy suit still slightly loose from her recovery, and her heels clicked with purpose but not certainty. Dorian greeted her personally at the elevator. "This way," he said not coldly. They entered a conference room where 2 other executives joined. Jenna opened her presentation. She outlined a project proposal that included employee restructuring, improved vendor communications, and a pilot mentorship initiative for mid-career hires returning from career gaps. It was clear, data-driven, elegant, but it wasn't her numbers that stood out. It was her framing. She said, "Every system I build is made to adapt. Because real life doesn't give us perfect conditions. It gives us sick days, school closures, power outages, and car repairs. I design for resilience." Dorian's fingers tapped once on the table, his version of applause. Later, after she stepped out, one executive turned to him. "She's not just qualified, she's already shaping how we think." He nodded, then paused. "She's not shaping it alone." Back in her new office, Jenna found Maddie organizing colored paper clips into categories, reds, blues, mixed. "Maddie," she asked gently, "do you like being here? I love it," her daughter said. "And do you like Mr. Blackwell?" Maddie nodded. "He listens." Jenna swallowed. She had noticed it too, that Dorian wasn't just watching Maddie. He was changing. And not for appearances, for real. Somehow, amidst profit reports and revenue targets, a child had reminded everyone what mattered. Dorian later stood at the window watching clouds gather over the Sound. The company he'd built was strong, dominant, respected. But for the first time, he wondered if that had ever been enough. A little girl had walked into his world with nothing but a resume, a drawing, and a peanut butter sandwich. And now his staff smiled more. Meetings ended with ideas instead of silence. People spoke with warmth. She hadn't changed the company's numbers. She had changed its soul. And as he turned from the window, one thought lingered. What happens when a company begins to see people as more than roles? When empathy becomes a business strategy? What happens when change begins? Not from a merger, but from a child's question. It started with a headline. Dorian Blackwell walked into his office one morning to find Janet waiting at his desk, her expression tense. Without a word, she handed him a tablet. The article stared back at him like a challenged CEO loses objectivity over child who's not his. The subheading was worse. Inside Olympus Consulting's emotional experiment is business still business. He read every line, jaw tightening with each sentence. Anonymous sources from within Olympus had spoken to a reporter at the Wall Street Ledger, questioning Dorian's judgment, his unorthodox relationship with Jenna Coleman, and the presence of Maddie on executive floors. The article didn't accuse him of anything outright. It didn't need to. It implied everything. Words like vulnerable, distracted, and personally entangled painted a portrait he couldn't undo. Maddie's name wasn't in the article, but it didn't matter. The staff would know. The board would read between every line. By noon, calls from board members began. Clients hesitated. One partner paused a major contract. Olympus's stock wobbled, nothing catastrophic but enough to spark internal panic. Cassandra Locke, Senior VP of Strategic Affairs, and Dorian's longtime rival, wasted no time stoking the fire. "We need to be careful," she told the board in a private session. Mr. Blackwell's emotional involvement with a candidate he barely knew, and the resulting changes in company policy raise serious concerns. This is about governance. Behind the scenes, Dorian could feel the ground shifting, but it was Maddie who paid the first real price. That Friday afternoon, she didn't come to the office. Jenna called instead. "Her teacher pulled me aside today," she said quietly. "Some of the other kids, they've heard their parents talking. They're saying Maddie's mom is in love with her boss, that Maddie only gets to visit because I flirted my way into Olympus." Dorian's heart dropped. "She doesn't understand what's happening," Jenna continued, "but she knows she's being whispered about." There was a pause on the line. "I'm going to step back," Jenna said. "No, I have to. She's 7, Dorian. She shouldn't carry this. She's not carrying anything. I am." "That's not what the world sees," Jenna said, her voice tight. "And Olympus is beginning to crack under the pressure. You've worked your entire life for this company. You don't owe us more than that." He sat silently for a long moment. "You're wrong," he said, "about what I don't regret a single day since she walked into our lobby." That night, alone in his penthouse, Dorian looked at the photograph on his desk again. Caroline and Lily. A life lost in a single blink. He had built walls around his grief. High, unbreachable. But Maddie had slipped through not with force but with kindness, with trust, and now she was hurting because of him. The next morning, he walked into Olympus's executive boardroom with calm resolve. The board was waiting. Cassandra sat with her arms folded, the press clippings in a folder before her. "We're here to discuss perception," she began. "No," Dorian said. "We're here to discuss values." There was a murmur. Cassandra raised an eyebrow. "I know you're concerned about image," he continued, "but if we are truly the company we claim to be, innovative, human-centered, bold, then this moment is a test we cannot fail." "She's a child," Cassandra snapped. "This is not about vision. This is about optics and liability." Dorian opened a folder of his own and handed out data. Employee satisfaction retention rates improved, cross-departmental collaboration, all since the informal implementation of family-forward practices beginning the week Maddie arrived. "This is what change looks like," he said. "Messy, personal, and yes, uncomfortable, but it's also progress." Silence. Then a soft knock at the boardroom door. Maddie stepped in holding a piece of paper. Janet had brought her quietly. No one knew. "I made this for you," she said, walking up to Dorian. He knelt as she handed him a drawing. Crayon lines, childlike and sincere. 3 figures stood smiling. One tall in a suit, one with a ponytail, one small between them. Above the picture were 5 words. "You made room for me." Dorian's throat tightened. Around the table, several board members looked down. "I don't know what all this means," Maddie said softly, "but Mom says I'm not a problem. And you never made me feel like I was." Jenna entered moments later, breath caught in her chest, unsure whether to cry or pull her daughter away. But no one said a word. The moment had already said everything. Later, after the meeting adjourned and the crisis began to settle, Dorian stood alone at the window of his office. For all his years of disciplined vision and unshakable control, nothing had prepared him for the impact of one child's faith, or the cost of choosing compassion over calculation. But he knew now it was worth every risk, because some battles aren't about shareholders. They're about who you become when everything you've built is tested. And sometimes the smallest voices carry the greatest truth. 1 year later, Olympus Consulting's sleek Seattle headquarters looked much the same steel glass and purpose. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. The air felt warmer, the silence less sharp. The top floor now held more than just senior leadership. It held stories, laughter, life. The change hadn't come from a rebranding campaign or a high-budget initiative. It came from a little girl who once sat in a borrowed blazer and told a CEO the truth. The transformation had begun quietly, an empty office converted into a quiet zone for children during after-school hours. A flexible work policy rolled out on a trial basis. A new internal network called Bridge Pairing Employees returning from life disruptions with peer mentors. Within months, Olympus reported higher retention rates, more engaged teams, and a rise in cross-functional collaboration. But none of it compared to what happened in Dorian Blackwell's heart. The man, once known for his razor-edged logic, had softened not in resolve, but in perspective. His calendar now included morning walks to local elementary school science fairs, late-night Zooms with other CEOs curious about Olympus's evolution, and Tuesday dinners with two people who had redrawn his world. At Jenna's modest home in Queen Anne, life was quieter, but no less meaningful. The lasagna never turned out quite the same way twice. Maddie's homework projects now included plans for Olympus's Kids Zone, complete with bean bags and healthy snacks. And Dorian, though still in his suit, and always a little formal, was there. Present. Steady. But it was a manila envelope that changed everything again. It arrived on a Thursday morning, hand-delivered by a courier with no return label. Janet, ever discreet, set it on Dorian's desk without a word. Inside were lab results. Old blood work reprocessed at his quiet request. He had sent it weeks ago against reason, driven by a whisper in his chest he couldn't ignore. And now the page stared back at him with certainty. Paternity confirmed. 99.9%. Maddie was his daughter. He had once believed grief was a boundary not to be crossed. That loss closed doors forever. But here was something new. Not a second chance at the same life, but the unexpected gift of connection through a path no one saw coming. Dorian didn't say anything that night over dinner. Instead, he listened as Maddie recounted a school trip to the aquarium and how the octopus changed colors when it got scared. He watched as Jenna, tired but glowing, tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear and laughed at her daughter's impression of the octopus. Later, as they stood at the sink washing dishes, he asked quietly, "Do you ever wonder why Maddie's father never showed up?" Jenna's hands stilled. "I used to," she said. "But it stopped mattering when I realized we were enough." He nodded, heart thudding. "She deserves the truth someday," he said. Jenna looked at him confused. Then, slowly, her expression changed. "Oh, they didn't say much after that, not that night. But something settled between them. Not panic, not fear, just a quiet awareness that the lines of their story had always been meant to cross." Weeks later, standing on stage at the University of Washington's Family Forward Work Summit, Dorian addressed a crowd of HR leaders, founders, and CEOs. Behind him, a banner read, "The Blackwell Foundation Building, Workplaces for Real Life." He spoke not as a man trying to save a company, but as someone who had been saved from the weight of his own design. "We once measured success by hours worked and doors closed," he said. "But some of the most transformative leadership I've seen came from a child who asked better questions than most boardrooms ever do." In the front row, Maddie sat proudly, holding program brochures she had helped fold the night before. Beside her, Jenna watched with the same strength that had once carried her through hospital rooms and rejection letters. After the applause, as guests mingled and media gathered, Maddie reached for Dorian's hand and said, "Does this mean we're kind of a family now?" He knelt beside her, took a deep breath, and smiled. I think we always were. We just didn't have the words for it yet. Not long after Jenna received a small wrapped box. Inside was a delicate bracelet, a silver compass with a single charm. She always said Dorian whispered a woman should have her own direction. And I think you've more than found yours. Jenna traced the compass with her finger. This belonged to Caroline. He nodded. I think she'd be proud of all of us. And in that moment, something beautiful anchored itself, not just in memory but in possibility. Legacies, Dorian realized, aren't built from unbroken lines or perfect decisions. They're made from the choice to keep showing up, to see people, to make room. And sometimes they begin not with a headline, a strategy, or a quarterly review, but with a knock on a lobby desk and the voice of a little girl who simply refused to be ignored. Dorian Blackwell built a world where power was the only currency that mattered. He had weathered the brutal winds of grief, buried his heart in silence, and constructed a fortress so high no feeling could scale it. Olympus. Consulting was his legacy, a testament to control, efficiency, and structure. But, in all his precision, he never planned for the moment a child would walk in and turn everything he thought he knew upside down. Maddie Coleman didn't come to Olympus with a resume of her own. She came with crayon's conviction and the unshakable belief that her mother deserved to be seen. She spoke without fear. She questioned without hesitation. And through her simple acts of truth, she exposed a company's blind spots and softened the edges of a man once defined by hardness. Jenna, her mother, carried a quiet kind of resilience, one forged not in boardrooms, but in sleepless nights over due bills and hospital visits. Her strength wasn't loud, it wasn't praised in Forbes, but it was the kind of strength that shapes the world from behind the scenes. And in her vulnerability, she showed a CEO that leadership isn't about domination. It's about compassion, consistency, and courage when no one is watching. Together, these three souls, once strangers from wildly different worlds, created something rare, a new kind of legacy. One that isn't built on profits alone, but on presence. One where children can be heard working, parents can be honored, and second chances can be earned, not given. What began as an unexpected interview became a movement inside Olympus. The company became a symbol of human-first leadership balancing innovation with inclusion. Dorian, once isolated in grief, found something deeper than ambition. He found connection. And in a twist no one saw coming, he discovered that the little girl who brought color into his gray world was his own daughter all along. This story isn't just about corporate transformation or hidden family ties. It's about what happens when we pause long enough to see people for who they really are, beyond the titles, the mistakes, and the circumstances. So, what can we take from all this? The real lesson here is this: kindness doesn't weaken leadership, it defines it. Second chances aren't signs of failure, they are signs of grace. And legacy isn't built by how high you climb, but by how deeply you love. In today's world where speed, competition, and judgment often overshadow humanity, this story reminds us to lead with empathy, to listen even when it's inconvenient, to believe that no one is too small to make a difference. And when life gives us interruptions, we can choose to see them not as distractions, but as divine redirections. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of something true in your own life, we'd love to hear from you in the comments below. And please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue creating meaningful stories that touch the heart and uplift the soul. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.